Hi guys, so as you know, we have started the topic of biodiversity, right? It's the last chapter of your syllabus for 12th. So biodiversity is basically what? The amount of species living within a region, right? We did the types of biodiversity in our last video. So today we are going to try and understand the gradients in biodiversity. So how does species richness change or vary with different factors on earth? So the first two factors that we will take into consideration are latitude and altitude. So latitude means farther you go away. So if this is the earth, pardon my bad diagram though, this is the equator of the earth. So these are your tropics, these are your temperates, and then it's your frigid zone, right? So 0 degrees, 23.5 and 6.5, right? So from the equator to the tropics, this zone is known as the tropical region. Then it's known as the temperate region. So this is your tropical region, this is your temperate region, and then these two are your frigid zones, right? So it has been seen, if you would look at examples, if you look at the bird species present in Colombia, which is closer to the tropics, as compared to New York, which is closer to the temperate, as compared to Greenland, which is closer to the frigid, there is a steady decrease in the number of bird species, right? So we see that the farther we move from the equator, the farther we keep going from the equator, the number of total species or the total biodiversity decreases, correct? Similarly, it has been seen that with altitude, so with increase in height, for every 1000 meters increase in height, you have a drop of about 6.5 degrees Celsius in temperature. So the temperatures get lower and lower as you go above height, at a certain height. Along with that, obviously oxygen saturations in air decreases. Therefore, it has also been seen that with increase in height, you have low biodiversity. So, you will have max biodiversity at sea level. And if you were to consider the highest amount of height, so as we know it's the Everest, so there it's something around 3000 and a few meters. So there you would have the lowest biodiversity. So the highest will be at sea level. So over years we've tried to figure out why such variations exist. So the very simple reasons are very obvious, right? So oxygen saturation decreases, temperature decreases, and therefore with altitude, living at a higher altitude is more difficult. Sustenance of life is more difficult because there will be reduced resources. Okay? As you climb higher, the soil, the nature of the soil will change, soil topography will change, and therefore it will be difficult for plants to grow. And without a good amount of plant cover, it's difficult for animal life to sustain. Correct? So these are common problems associated with altitude. Along with that, at higher altitudes, you do not really have a lot of environmental stability. Right? When you climb up, there is a lot of unpredictable weather situations. So for example, snowstorms, avalanches, massive cloudburst rains, all of them become a problem for survival. And therefore, as you would climb up, you would see less and less and less biodiversity. Also, we have noticed that along the equator, the earth is the widest, and therefore it has the greatest surface area for growth, and therefore you have the best amount of growth in the equator. Also, the equator has the highest solar input in the whole earth, right? So we have 12 hours of sunlight more or less every day. We are a tropical country as compared to, think of the Arctics. They have 6 months of darkness and 6 months of light only, right? So therefore the solar input varies, and because solar input varies, solar input is very directly related to the plant cover, and plant cover in turn is related to animal sustenance, right? Therefore, in regions like Arctics or the Antarctica, you have permafrost. It's completely covered with snow throughout the year. So there is no soil for plant growth. If there is no plant, it's really, really difficult for herbivores to grow. There are no herbivores. There are very few animals which are all carnivorous in nature, right? Other than that, we have also, it's also very obvious that in places where you have larger summers and monsoons, the growing period available to animals and plants equally would be larger, because you have more sunlight, you have more availability of water. All of this makes the growing periods longer as compared to temperate or frigid zones where they have large, long winters. Now in winters, most animals will either hibernate or they will be forced to migrate. Because of all of these reasons, the growing period, especially for plants, they become very small. And because we have done ecology, I expect all of you to understand why plant cover is important for increasing species richness, because without plants you can't really sustain animal life. Also, over the history of the earth, we have seen that temperate zones are most often the most affected by glaciations. Equators are affected, equatorial tropical regions are affected, but to a much, much lower scale. You never really see tropics getting covered in snow. So therefore, whenever those glaciations happened in the temperate zones, there has been mass extinctions of animals, and therefore the species richness has gone down, right? So all of these reasons contribute to the factor that you find lower species diversity, biodiversity in the away from the tropics and also at higher altitudes, right? I hope this is clear. This is a question that is very, very probable for boards. And also for NEET, you can get multiple choices. I mean multiple choices in the sense you'll be given multiple reasons and select the correct reason. You could be given a data-based question where the facts of the matter will help you solve it, right? Now, even though I have stressed on the fact that as you will move away, you will see species richness fall. There was this scientist, a naturalist actually, a German naturalist called Alexander von Humboldt. He did an experiment. He explored the jungles or the wilderness of South America. And he found out that yes, if I explore, let's say 1 square kilometers, and I find 10 animals, if I explore 30 square kilometers, I will find 15. But that doesn't mean that if I go on increasing my area constantly within that particular geographic location, species richness will keep increasing. No, it will come to a halt. So that basically means that within a geographic location, a small narrowed down geographic, not necessarily very small, but a fixed geographic location, the amount of species available is already fixed, right? So if you were to walk through the whole location, yes, at first you will notice 2 things, and then you will notice 5 things, then you will notice 10 things. But if there are a total of 50 organisms, a species living, you will only see 50. So at a certain point, you'll feel like this whole region, it is not a linearly increasing curve. For that matter, it was a hyperbolic curve. Now, when plotted on the log scale, this is a linear curve which is described by this equation, which is log S equals to log C plus Z log A, right? So S is the species richness, which is dependent on the constant, which is the y-intercept, and the area, but depending on the regression coefficient. So how quickly is it regressing? It has been seen that no matter what species we are talking about, and no matter what the area, what the region is, Z usually varies between a 0.1 to 0.2 for most species in most regions. However, if you were to increase the area, so let's say now if I am talking about the whole of the American continent, then for a larger space, so for example for continental areas, this Z usually varies from 0.6 to 1.2. That means it gets steeper and steeper. Okay. So a rule of thumb to understand this equation is to understand the higher Z will represent higher biodiversity, right? So if it's very probable to get questions like this in NEET, that you have an area A where Z is 0.8, okay, and you have area B where Z is 0.1 and you have area C where Z is 1.2, let's say, or 1. Okay. Now, if and only if you are told that all of these three areas are comparably of similar, like they're similar in size, so they're the same amount of area we are talking about, and A is not a small piece of land and B is not a small piece of land while C is a whole continent. So, if there is a constant in the region that we are talking about, in that case, C has the highest species diversity, biodiversity, whereas B has the lowest. Correct? So then, for a given fixed amount of area, if the Z varies from place to place, then whoever has the higher Z or a steeper slope has the higher biodiversity. I hope this much of this chapter is clear. It's a relatively easy chapter. We'll be covering it quickly, and before NEET, I am going to try and give you mind maps for animal and plant kingdom. Okay, all the best. Thank you.